In this video, I'm going to be looking at Writing Test 2, how to write a proper introduction for your essay. I hope you find it useful.
Okay, the introduction. The introduction doesn't have to be very long. Keeping it short and simple is a good idea because the body of your essay is much more important than the introduction. But it is still the first thing that people read, so it's better to give a good impression. You basically need three things in your introduction. For an argument essay, you need some background. For the background, you could use your own knowledge. You could also choose to personalize it, or you could choose a straight to the point approach. And this leads to the argument, and then finally your opinion. And then the discussion essay has the same first requirement, some background, for which you can choose your own knowledge, or you could personalize it, or you could also get straight to the point. But this is then followed by the issue, and then finally the purpose. It's a good idea to give your introduction some background to make it true. So there are three rules for this. What you write in your background needs to be true. Not something that you think of that has no connection with reality. It has to be related to the topic. And then for argument essays, it has to hint or suggest that there's some possible issue or problem or dilemma. For discussion essays, there must be a hint or a suggestion at the discussion, the importance or the seriousness of the subject. Now let's look at this example. Recently, there has been heated debate about whether public money should be spent on the arts in contemporary society. Is this a good introduction? Well, whenever I see an essay that starts with something like nowadays or currently or recently or in contemporary society, the first thing I think is that it's not true. That the student who wrote this just memorized some phrase from some book. Because, first of all, it's not true. In this case, the topic is very dry, very boring. There's no heated debate about this issue, about whether public money should be spent in the arts. You don't read in the newspaper that people are discussing this issue. It's not really controversial at all. Second of all, the prompt asks you to use your own knowledge and experience. And in this introduction, that's completely lacking. There's no own knowledge or experience. It just tells the examiner that you memorized this phrase and you're using it in your writing. That creates a bad first impression. What you should be doing is impressing the examiner with your own knowledge and experience. How do you do that? Well, there are three things you can do. You could use a factual statement using your own knowledge of the world. Some personalization about your experiences generally or specific. Or you can get straight to the point. I'll explain the straight to the point approach later. So let's look at the first method. Using your own knowledge of the world. This gives your writing meaning, since it's related to the topic. So let's say, for example, that you are going to write about traffic problems. You could use this example. When people try to park cars in cities, they usually find it very difficult. Or you could write that society is becoming more mechanized, and few would doubt that the number of cars on the roads is increasing, sometimes to excessive amounts. Or, another example, there appears to be more cars than ever on the roads, for example, in city centers. It's very much the same everywhere. So let's look at some ways that you can add meaning to your writing and make it true. Let's look at this example question. All high school students should be encouraged to take part in community service programs. To what extent do you agree or disagree with this statement? Now here, let's look at a candidate's response. Some people believe that high school students would benefit from doing unpaid work in their local communities. I completely agree that community service programs for teenagers are a good idea. Now, the introduction might not look bad, but mention is made of some people, but it doesn't specifically reference anything about the people. It doesn't say who they are, where they are, when this issue occurs, why it occurs, or for how long it's been an issue. So, instead of just writing some people, we could say who is more affected by this issue. For example, if we choose to give more detail, to add more meaning by using to, we could say many seniors in high school choose to do volunteer work in their communities since this volunteer work reflects well on their school records. Or, if we choose the second way to talk about where this issue is more relevant, we could say high school volunteers can often be seen in their local communities performing their volunteer work in places like nursing homes, libraries, and local parks. Or we could use when. We could say volunteers dressed in their high school uniforms can be seen performing their volunteer services in the community after school finishes in the afternoon, with the occasional excursion in the weekend. Or we could say why. With competition for a place at university being as fierce as it is, high school students perform volunteer services in the hope that with this service on their school record, it'll improve their chances of entrance. Or we could use how long this has been an issue. In previous generations, high school students had also volunteered in their communities, but this trend has apparently increased alongside a rise in student numbers and consequent stiffer competition to be accepted into university. So when you're writing your introduction, think about how you can give it meaning by using some specific referencing. Okay, so problem. You're not a very fast writer. You're quite slow, in fact. What do you do? Or, on your test day, with only 40 minutes in which to finish your essay, you start to panic because you find the topic quite difficult to write about. And you don't want to waste too much time on your introduction. What do? Well, you can use the straight to the point approach. There are two ways to do this. The first way is just to give the true background. So in your opening statement, you can simply state the truth. For example, this writing test or this IELTS task raises the question of blah blah blah, which is true. You're being faced with a test situation where this question is being asked of you. It's perfectly fine to use this as your opening statement. Or you could say, for example, the issue to be considered or the issue under consideration here is whether, and then use your topic statement. Or the most basic and the most honest, well, maybe not the most honest, but the most basic approach you could follow is just to say, for this essay I'm asked, or for this essay I intend to discuss, argue, consider, and then whatever the topic is. So you're just being direct and honest about what you are required to do. This doesn't mean that you can't give meaning or add meaning to your writing. You could add some commentary about the topic. So for example, the IELTS writing task proposes the rather extreme idea that, and then you put your topic there. Or the issue under consideration is somewhat obscure, but nevertheless interesting, concerning whether or not, and then you can add the issue there. Or, for this essay, I'm asked to consider both sides of an issue about which surely very few people would agree, namely whether, and then you put your topic there. Or, the issue to be considered here is one which, and then you can add some specific collective noun, would certainly support whether, and then you put the topic there. Now, this collective noun, this is a group of people who are concerned with an issue or who have an interest in an issue. For example, in the earlier example where we talked about students doing volunteer work, well, the collective noun there would be students. Other examples of collective nouns would be politicians, doctors, environmentalists, and so on. Okay, the second approach, or the second way, is to just not give a background. Get straight to the point in your introduction. So your introduction can be quite short. For example, people, this collective noun, remember, may claim, or it could be claimed that, and then rephrase the question. I would argue, however, and then give your opinion. So let's look at an example where a collective noun has been added. So in this introduction, we see gun enthusiasts believe that all appropriately screened members of society have the right to own guns. I, however, would argue the opposite, that such a right is not good for many reasons, some of which follow. So here we have gun enthusiasts as our collective noun. Now, if you can, it might be a better idea to give some background just before that. Just before your first sentence of your opening statement, you could give just a little bit of background. So, for example, the use of firearms has a long history in human civilization, and throughout this period, they were undeniably often used to kill people. Nevertheless, and then you give your opinion. Now, if you cannot write such a background, or you feel you don't have time because the question turned out to be quite difficult, you can still use just a very, very basic opening statement. But adding background is better if you can at all. Whatever approach you choose, the whole introduction and the opening statement need to be short. Remember, most of your score is going to come from the body, not the introduction. Now, so far, we've looked at, in the case of argument and discussion essays, at using some background through 3 different methods. Now it's time to look at, in the case of argument essays, how to introduce the argument. Now, the argument can either be open or closed. In the case of an open statement, you don't give any particular side in your introduction. Whereas in a closed statement, you do give a definite side. Let's look at some example sentences you can use. You can use these sample sentences as a basis on which to do your own writing. So let's look at the first sample. You could write something like, this leads one, or one is led to wonder whether, and then you put in your topic clause, using keywords from the question. I suggest you don't paraphrase the keywords, just to make sure that your writing stays on track. Secondly, you can use the phrase, this raises the question of, or this results in different views on, or different views thus exist about whether, and then again you move on to talk about your topic clause. Or thirdly, in this climate, or because of this, it could be argued that, or people could argue that, and then you put in your topic clause. Remember for people to use a specific collective noun. Also, you could write, this leads to the claim that, or this results in the view that, or this supports the idea of, or many people with that support, and then you use the topic noun phrase. Here is a table illustrating the different structures. Now, on adding meaning or making your sentences true. Well, the best way to do that is to honestly and specifically respond to the question. So, for example, if you choose to write, this result in different views, think, well, does it really result in such views, in such different views? Let's say the topic is human cloning. You could write that this results in different views, if it's true, but is this the best way to get your message across? For better style and collocation, you could maybe use one of these example sentences, or use these example sentences on to base your own ideas and your own writing on. So firstly, we could say, basically, this results in two diametrically opposed views on whether cloning humans should be legalized. This is an open question. You don't say what side you're on. Or you could say, because of this, only the most ardent of technophiles would argue that human cloning should be legalized. This is a closed statement because you take a position. Or you could say, in this climate, the legalization of human cloning is a truly divisive issue. The statement again is open because you don't take a position. Now next, we'll look at how to give your opinion for argument essays. Okay, so just have a look at the table just to remind yourself of where we are now. Giving your opinion for argument essays. Now, this should be the shortest and easiest part of your introduction. Here are some model sentences you can use. You could say, in my opinion or view, or I take the view position. I must disagree, believing, I believe, think would say, my opinion, view is, I take the view position, it is my opinion, I'm off the view, I hold the belief that, and then you give your opinion. Again, using keywords from the prompt. Keywords that you should probably not paraphrase, just to make sure that you keep on track. Now, there's no need to repeat these words, I take the view, or in my opinion, and so on, in the body or the conclusion of your essay, because after you state that this is your opinion, these statements are going to be treated as fact in your essay. So it's going to sound repetitive and unnecessary and even nonsensical to then afterwards say opinion, opinion, opinion. Because in your mind and in your argument, these are facts now. Now let's have a look at logic signals. Opinion sentences need some logic signals or phrases, with closed statements either to show agreement or contrast, or when you're writing an open background to show emphasis. So have a look at this table where you can see some examples. So let's look at an example of how to show a logic transition when you are trying to show agreement in your introduction. So your opinion sentence shows agreement with the background. So in your background sentence, you said, for example, many people agree that whatever the situation is. And then your opinion is that you also agree. So you would use the word to or also or similarly to show the agreement. Here's an example. So notice the last sentence, I too believe it's not worthwhile. Now let's look at an example of how to show contrast. So in your background message, you would have said, many people agree, whatever, but you disagree. So here the logical transition words would be however, yet, or in contrast, to show contrast. So let's look at an example. Notice the last sentence, I must, however, disagree with this, believing it to be an inappropriate approach. And next, we can look at an example of how to use emphasis. So this is used when the opening statement is open. So you would have said, many people argue about this issue. And then your logical transition words would be indeed, or certainly, or clearly. And then you give your opinion on the matter. Here's an example. Notice the last sentence. After examining one cause, I will argue that it's indeed negative. Okay, now we're looking at giving the issue purpose for discussion essays. So I'm just referring back to the table so you know what we're talking about now. The third step in writing the introduction to a discussion essay. Now, since there's no opinion, you're only going to write an announcement of the purpose of the essay, what you're going to do, what you're going to write about. There are two methods that you can follow. Model 1 uses this approach. It uses the fact that the background message has already suggested that the issue is serious. This allows us to use so or similar words to discuss a cause and effect relationship. This allows us to show the purpose clearly. Here, you can look at some example sentences that can be used. In the first set of examples, the purpose statement consists of a verb phrase and in the second example, the purpose statement consists of a noun phrase. Noun phrases are more academic, so you should try to use these in your writing. Now let's look at the second model. The second model is a little bit more simple. It uses verbs of intent, such as consider, examine, explore, discuss, and so on, to either discuss causes, effects or problems, or suggestions. You can have a look at all the patterns in this table. Now, when it comes to content for mixed essays, or the content statement for mixed essays, it's a little bit different because you're asked to discuss an issue and give an opinion or argue a side. So you could follow the following model. In this essay, after first discussing a cause or examining a reason or analyzing the consequences, I will argue that, and then you give your opinion. So let's look at how we put it all together in argument essays. So just a reminder, first of all, give some background, then introduce the argument, and then give your opinion. So here's an example of what an introduction could look like for an argument essay. If you choose to use the straight-to-the-point approach, it might look something like this. Okay, so now let's move on to discussion essays. If you put everything together, giving some background, introducing the issue, and giving your purpose, an introduction might look something like this.
So good luck writing your introductions.